Welcome to the King Heroes Journey podcast. My name is Beth Martens. I have the huge pleasure of hosting Joe Martino from Collective Evolution. He's the creator and founder of this incredibly vast body of work. I will take a minute to introduce what you've written at your website. He says, deep down, I get a lot out of connecting our individual and collective narratives, which is the topic we're talking about today, to the world events. Why do we create the world the way it is? What does that tell us about how we can change our world?
So it founded in 2009, and 3 years after that, we started to really kind of, look a little bit more into society. What are current events saying? What's going on and why and what's happening? And the more we did that, the more we see that current events are kind of a reflection of our culture. And what is culture? A culture is usually our beliefs and the way we feel about something, the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about deep questions, begin to create our beliefs around something, and then it begins to create a culture and how we operate and how we come together as society. So if we want to change society, we got to go back and we got to question those deep underlying questions that formed our culture to begin with. And so that's kind of what our work seeks to do, is ask those deeper questions. Maybe we could live differently. Maybe we could be differently. Maybe we could make different choices. What happens if we know ourselves more deeply? What happens if we cultivate a better sense of self-awareness and introspection and, all these fun things that we can do? How does that change how we live our lives? And then in turn, how might that change how we live in society? And I think that's kind of been part of our brand, is like we're kind of not afraid to touch on the subjects that are icky, if you will. And I know vaccines, for example, and UFOs are very big subjects now, but back in 2009, 2010, 2011, when we started, like, it was a very quiet subject. With the alternative media collaborations that we had, they would always tell us, we can't post your vaccine information, we can't post your UFO information. Was very, very controversial, and we would get absolutely destroyed online for doing that, even when we were just presenting a new paper or having a discussion saying, hey, are we sure this is the right thing, or can we look at things differently? And then to see, in 2016, 2017, like how much these conversations became huge, where now the mainstream had to actually spend a lot of time addressing it, was fascinating. That was really cool to see. What we've noticed is that there are certain things that happen that the mainstream might pick up on and use as an object to point a finger at and say, look how dangerous it is. This is so verifiably false, which it is. Look how dangerous it is when we let anybody talk about vaccines. There's a very big difference between approaching the vaccine conversation from they're designed to kill everybody, and we can question whether or not they're actually safe and effective, and how might we actually go about this conversation in a way where we can make a lot of headway. And what we found, and I wrote an essay about this in 2020, is that in the conspiracy space, I don't know what else to call it. so I call it that. Conspiracy, alternative media, whatever.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, you're free here.
There is a decent sized culture that's very impactful on making it very difficult to have these conversations in a level-headed, grounded manner that can be approached by mainstream minds and thinkers, because it's very ungrounded, it's very certain, it's very assertive, it's very aggressive, and it isn't always based on evidence or fact, and sometimes does have fake information pushed within it. And then there's everybody in between that's trying to have a more serious conversation about this, that says, no, but hold on, that's not the point we're making. We're making a serious point over here. And they just say, well, you're an anti-vaxxer. And ultimately, what do we want, right? That's one of the key things. Do we want to just expose and get revenge? Because for some people, that's what it is. For someone like me, I only want to expose to invite the thought that we have to spend time thinking about change. To spend time thinking about change that we can't just accept. So we expose for the purposes of just saying, look, that's what's going on. Do you want to play that game or no? No? Okay, great. So what game do we want to play? Okay, let's think about and talk about that. Okay, now how do we get there? And we move through that.
Yeah. It's a lesson on how does worldview get manufactured and inside yourself, and it's pretty fascinating when you start to ask people that we're not even used to being asked, like, what are your values? But to know yourself and to get into that, like the heart and the soul, that's to me the whole work of being on Earth, embodied as we are, to really not just know ourselves, but to know our place, and especially in the collective culture as you're describing. So it is incredibly complex as a process when you start to break it down. I'm so glad you've done the work to do this, because it's. I also love your point about curiosity, because curiosity is courage, right? You cannot be curious without being courageous,
Yeah.
and be willing to find something that you didn't want to find. Right, you're actually open to something you haven't pre-writ what you're going to find, and I think that's actually a decent entry into talking about narrative, both what happens inside us individually, and then what's happening at the level of the collective. What is narrative?
A narrative can be something that, obviously if we're telling a particular story, the story has a narrative. And what do we tell stories about? We tell stories about events, we tell stories about situations, we tell stories about massive questions that we have about our universe, our lives, whatever it might be. And I think narratives can be built off of ultimately stuff we choose to believe, whether that's evidence-based or not. When you have current events, for example, and there might be one version of the truth or one narrative, and then you have a different set of people looking at it with another narrative, and then you ask the question, well, what does the evidence say? What is the evidence supporting that narrative? And I think this is where we've come to. It feels as though we're in a very confusing time in society. It seems that with the information age, the internet, information can spread so fast. Narratives can be built so quickly. We're at a point where what happens when we cannot agree on what the facts are? What happens when we can't put together, a couple of different experts that have opposing opinions and have them look to reason things out? What ends up happening is specific narratives might get built based on who has the largest microphone. And so I think we're at this point when we talk about narratives where some of the narratives we have may be incomplete, in the sense that there is more information that is not just an opinion, but there might be more information that is based on a fact, and it's sort of being left out of what the equation is that builds the narrative. And so we're kind of in this time where we're almost warring, if you will, with narratives. We're shooting them back and forth, and the narratives inform the culture, which informs the choices, which informs the world we see today. So again, it's going back to the narrative, the story, and saying, what is the story saying? Is it actually accurate? And what are the implications of this? And what are the implications of only having a certain subset of people building a narrative while everybody else is being asked to be sidelined? And if they choose to say, hey, you know what, I'm not sure that I want to be sidelined, they're forcibly sidelined, right? And again, even that, it's not to say that, every single person that's been sidelined had something to say that was true, because sometimes those people are saying things that are false. I'm not saying I agree with the idea that they should be sidelined. I'm saying that there is such thing as incorrect facts or stories or narratives being brought to the table within even the alternative space that we do need to talk about. That is true that is happening, but there's another sliver there of really solid factual information that can very much change a narrative that's being left aside. And I think that's kind of the position we're in right now when we're looking at what a narrative is and how it's impacting our society.
And infecting our society.
Yeah.
At the same time, amazing points. It's not a cut and dry kind of situation, and human beings live and breathe on story, right? It's such a beautiful way to connect. If that's your benevolent intention to make connection, then that's food. Literally, they can grow and feed on that. and then it is highly weaponized, the very same tool and mechanism.
Like, look how much people have, whether it's mainstream or alternative, attacked this idea of fake news and associated it with one's level of intelligence or one's level of whatever. And so now everybody's afraid to look at something because they don't want to feel stupid, right? Well, what's that going to lead to in a long-term way, right? Is that helpful? Does that create a thriving society, or does that create a, I don't know, type of society, right?
To me, we're in a world that you either create or you be created. It's one of those poles. And the moment you're in creative mode and you're courageous enough to vision, what do you want? What kind of world do you create? And then what's my role in actually doing that? Oh, bunch of work, you say. Okay, well, let's get on it and be responsible for this. It's so easy to just keep railing against the machine and calling out this and that and think you've done such a good job at the end of the day. It's not to put people down, and I apologize if it sounds like that, but that's the reality, that if you don't make your world, somebody else will, and you don't get to see how beautiful and powerful and amazing your world is. Like, that's a regular exercise, and I find it difficult sometimes too to get into visioning mode. But once you do, it's like, what kind of world do I want? And it's like, there's gardens and there's fresh food and there's beautiful people and it's healthy sunshine and connection and everybody, so I can get on a real roll and I start to light up, like, yeah, I can have that world. It's what's between me and that, and all of a sudden things will synchronistically start to line up that point towards that, because this I don't know why the word simulation keeps coming. I don't really talk like that very much, but I notice it more and more that I can have a thought and the thing manifests. The good thought, the bad thought, doesn't matter what it is. It's just like instant. So the level of responsibility that we have to exercise our creative power is it's a must. I don't think we can get out of that job.
Yeah, I mean, we're like you even suggested there with the good thought, bad thought. We're always, in essence, creating in some way, right? We're making decisions, we're making choices, and life. Exactly. From my perspective, life and our reality around us, and when you look at a quantum potential, you're essentially seeing a non-judgmental fabric that makes up the basis of our entire reality, and we choose how to form that complete potentiality into something, whether it's a quote unquote positive idea or a quote unquote negative idea or whatever it might be. There's a base neutrality that exists there. And so the question is really, what do we want to create and how do we create? We're starting to see within science, as well as our ancient history, that the nature of our reality is different. It doesn't line up with the worldview that we hold, and that forms our world. That forms the day-to-day world we see, which might suggest the idea that our nature, or what we're capable of, even if we want to leave it at that, so very evidently, is not necessarily being exhibited. And that we're not stuck in this, we're a passive observer having an experience on Earth that was formed by, potentially this idea of evolution, and that we can't affect the world around us, that we can't affect the potentials around us because everything happens to us, right? That's the belief system, that's the narrative, that's the overwhelming scientific worldview, but that we're actually a part of it in some way, not just as individuals, but as a collective. So there's an individual experience, but we're also doing it collectively. We're agreeing to something collectively, right? That's why we have this shared experience, or at least from what we can tell.
Exactly.
And so the question becomes is if what we're starting to see doesn't line up with what we're believing and what has become the fossilized version of how our society functions. And if we were to say, okay, well, what are the implications of this new understanding and how might that create our world differently? Now we have a whole new way of imagining what our world could be, and that it so very much could align with our nature, that we won't be out there killing each other at all. Maybe that's just an idea we developed from our current worldview, our current environment, which has turned potentially people into these survival mode, programmed, feeling very on edge all the time, and from that we go at each other.
Yeah, they keep throwing Mad Max at us every time I turn around. There's some.
If we were to sort of just look at the early times of Earth as we know it in our history, we'll say, and where there were two sides of the world, if you will. You got one set of people in North America and one set of people in Europe, and those Europeans come across the water, or the North Americans or Americans go across the water the other way, whatever you want to do, and they come into contact with each other. And let's say they did in war. Let's just say they shared their technology, their knowledge, their language, the way they cook, the way they do culture, the way they do all these things. And again, I always get emotional talking about this, but it's like what happens is an expansion, right? People, all of a sudden, they expand their idea of what people they did not know existed, who have their own experience, their own way of seeing things. Boom. Big expansion of ideas. And if we're peaceful with each other, which we absolutely can be, it's very easy for most of us to do that, we can converge and expand even further, right? So the Europeans were aliens to the North Americans and vice versa, right? Humanity is in an information age. We're in a connection age like never seen before, where we know so much more. Maybe not super intimately, but in a lot of ways, we know so much about what's going on in every part of the world, with the exception of some very remote places, right? And in some ways, we ask ourselves, what are we advancing, right? We're kind of at this point where we're advancing technology really fast, but we're not so much advancing the quality of life or how to look at things differently.
Yeah, it's on the decline, but
right.
Yeah.
We're kind of stuck, right? Maybe there's the odd, like we make some strides in racism or equality or something like that in some meaningful ways, but but at the same time, sometimes we're getting stuck, right? But our technology going through the roof, right? Because there's money there, there's whatever, right? My thesis or my idea here is that we need a new Europeans or North Americans, or humanity's ready for that, which is to say our time to interact with cosmic neighbors is here. And that's why the curiosity exists around UFOs, extraterrestrials, regardless of how much or how little the mainstream covers it. The curiosity is deepening so fast. Everybody is curious about this topic. People that once shut this out as complete craziness is now saying, well, yeah, maybe, right? and it's a huge topic. And my idea is that this is something that is going to deeply make us question what our place is in the cosmos, what we're capable of, what other ways there are to look at life, how to live, how we can be, how we can do things. And I know that everything I'm saying is based on this idea of, well, it's going to be a peaceful experience. But it's because I think that the vast majority of extraterrestrial experiences are peaceful. I think there's only a small percentage that are not. And I think that there's a lot of evidence, if you do the homework, if you do the research, of very peaceful experiences, of very peaceful races, of different things that government knows that is very much peace related. Very few that what we might call is a little bit more war or conflict related. And so the thing for me is this is it's an opportunity to expand again, and it's something that I think is coming whether we like it or not. I think humanity's general collective consciousness, the way we think about things, the way we see things, I think it gets evolved in many ways. At some point, we could receive some grand interaction, right? It could happen, may not. Maybe we'll just drip our way up to disclosure slowly but surely, and then be open to it. But something's going to happen eventually, whether it's on our own volition or not, that expands our awareness into saying, wow, we're not alone in the universe. Okay, great. So how does that change my day-to-day life? Because when you really start to think about it, it changes a lot of things. Right, here we are as humanity going, we need to conserve, stop using, conserve. And it's not to say, let's go be wasteful. It's to say, we're thinking about scarcity still. as opposed to saying, hold on, the technologies, like I've stood in front of a free energy technology. I've stood in front of it. I've seen it operate. I was there with a whole bunch of investors and a whole bunch of engineers.
Wow.
That when their eyes, again, going back to the tool analogy with my brother when he led the tool, when these engineers understood what the inventor was saying about how the technology worked, their eyes lit up. They became children. They were, budging each other, being like, oh my God, like they were like, and I went home and I cried because you start realizing you're like, what are we doing here? And what are we holding back so much information from one another? The evidence of our extraordinary ability to do things is already here. This is the only thing that holds it back, right? We're not open to it, or we're not seeking it, or we're stuck on our ideas, or we're stuck on what we think we need to fight for, or what we think as opposed to, let's just explore and let's see what's going on, and let's do it at a grassroots level, because, I'm not sure that we can rely on government to do that for us.
Wow, what a beautiful answer. Thank you so much. So I'd like to make sure people know how to access your work.
I was talking to a buddy of mine asking how everything's going, and I'm like, honestly, dude, I wish I didn't have to think about supporting myself and the team, to do this work that I feel is so important. But what option do we have at this point, right? And so we do what we can, and that's where that can be found.